Hello, I'm Darren again. Today's topic comes from a question asking about narcissistic people and honesty. Now, this is an interesting question, but it's one I would like to look at from a particular perspective. So, today I'm not going to be looking at ways to decode their word salad. Instead, I'm going to look at the times when they are genuinely honest about what they're thinking, feeling, what their motivations are. These moments can happen for various reasons. Firstly, it could be as a form of intimidation or manipulation, or it could be because they feel safe or confident enough to share something about themselves. Can also be because perhaps for a brief moment their guard is down and they just speak their mind. But these moments tend to be short lived. Usually it's not long before they go back to being defensive. They can retract the things they said, so people might hear things like, "I never said that," or "That's not what I meant." Other times, depending on what they're saying, of course, well, they might actually believe these things to be qualities and virtues. So the following are what I would call little moments of clarity, times when you actually get to see what's behind the mask, get an idea of what's going on with them, how they view you, the world, even how they see themselves. And you might not necessarily hear the following word for word, but you might hear something close. And the first one would be after a disagreement or perhaps a series of arguments. You ask them why they're always so disagreeable. Well, they might say something like, "Admitting you're wrong is a sign of weakness." Now, not being wrong, but admitting you're wrong. Even narcissistic people generally know whenever they're wrong, mistaken, or in error. But even when you know they're wrong, they know they're wrong. They know that you know they're wrong. They have a tendency to double down on their position, on their opinion. They believe they need to always be right. They always need to know whatever it is they're talking about. To acknowledge error or that someone knows more than they do, well, that might bring up a sense of shame. They can sometimes make the most bizarre arguments to avoid being seen as wrong. They might try to discredit any evidence against their position. They might try to insult, threaten, or even humiliate whoever is opposing them. Narcissistic people have a false image of themselves. It's an image of being perfect and flawless, but it is very easily challenged. So instead of maybe just having a little bit of humility, in order to protect that image, they tend to dig their heels in. They'll try to rewrite history, sometimes even try to rewrite reality. Secondly, and similar to number one, is never admit anything. And you might even hear this as if they're giving you good advice. But really what they're telling you is if they have no problem avoiding any kind of responsibility or accountability. Now they'll admit to successes, achievements, or anything that they see as having positive outcomes, but certainly nothing that might have a negative outcome. And again, here we see the need to appear as perfect, flawless, sometimes even righteous. Number three, again relating to their disagreeable nature, and that's when no matter what someone does or suggests, they always have to try to change or own it somehow. Now, an example would be someone I worked with many years ago, and she would always find fault, difficulties, obstacles whenever anything was being discussed during meetings. And sometimes she would try to add something that had no relevance or served any practical purpose, and this would irritate the hell out of the rest of us. It's like she just seemed incapable of agreeing with anything. But one day, whenever she saw how frustrated everyone else was, she just laughed it off and said, "I always have to find something to change." And she said it as if it was just a little quirk, but it wasted so much of everyone's time and resources. And also, she could become quite bitter if she didn't get her own way. Narcissistic people like to feel as if they have control over things. They like to feel as if they own ideas, projects, and so on. So even if that means just adding one tiny little detail, it's almost like it magically becomes theirs and they get to take all the credit for it. Even in their personal relationships, they can find fault, obstacles, or try to find better ways of doing things whenever their partners share their ideas or make suggestions. And continuing with the disagreeable nature, number four is when they will say no to everything. You ask for something, it's no. You offer something, even if it comes from a good place, it's still no. Now, in a quiet, private moment, if you were to ask why it's no to everything, well, if they were honest, they might tell you because it feels like you're trying to control me. Again, narcissistic people have a false sense of superiority and like to feel as if they're in control of everything. If they want something, they tend to want it on their terms. They also have an all or nothing way of seeing things, so if someone is empowered somehow, they might feel as if they're being disempowered. To do something they're asked might feel as if they're having to submit themselves. Now, it can also be something of a confession, in the sense that perhaps they had controlling narcissistic parents who always controlled them, and they're just asserting themselves with you. Narcissistic people tend to lack insight and often blame other people for the things that others have done and said to them previously. Number 5 is if you ask why, they would ruin something like a special occasion or undermine you in front of others or perhaps sabotage your plans. In a brief moment of honesty, they might say something like, "I'm just trying to even the score." Narcissistic people can be very envious and competitive. They can also be quite vindictive. So when they say they just want to even the score, what they might mean is, you had a better time on your birthday than they had on theirs. Or perhaps you have more experience or skill in a certain area than they do. Or it could be maybe you have done or said something that hasn't met their expectations. Perhaps they perceive some kind of slight, something they have to set right. So you need to be punished somehow. But one way or another, maybe they just don't want you feeling too good about something, because if you do, you might feel better than them. Number 6 is how they can be very jealous. And when they're jealous, you might hear something like, "If you're not thinking about me, you must be thinking about someone else." Narcissistic people have a huge sense of entitlement as well as a desperate need for constant attention, admiration, and validation. Also, they don't like to share the spotlight with anyone. If you have other friends, they'll claim it's because you think more of others. If you have other priorities or responsibilities, they might claim you just don't care about them. They can struggle with the thought of people having anything else in their lives that might take the focus away from them, even for a moment. And it can manifest as depression, jealousy, anger, or anxiety. Lastly, number 7, which again comes from the sense of entitlement. So imagine you're having a discussion about problems in the relationship. Maybe they tell you the problems will stop, everything will be fine whenever you're more like this, less like that, whenever you start doing this and stop doing that, and you maybe think it over and ask, "Well, if I do all that, what do I get in return?" And the answer you get is, "Nothing." You have to do that. You have to do that unconditionally because you love me. You don't ask for anything in return. That's just being selfish. Now, as self-absorbed and deluded as that might sound, if you ever hear anything like that, believe them. They're being honest. Because it is all about what they want. It's all about their needs being met. That's what you're for. To ask for, or even just need anything in return, well, I'll refer you back to point number 4. So there are just 7 examples of when narcissistic people can be honest with others. Now, as always, if there's anything I've missed, anything you might like to add, please use the comment section. There are some interesting conversations start from these videos. But if you find this topic to be interesting, please consider subscribing, and until next time, thanks for watching.